In Caring Arms Chapter 3, You Think I'm a Demon? The sun had set hours ago, and she was outside, tending to the garden. Naruto's clinic was a modest one, not too big, not too small. His front yard, however, was quite expansive. It extended many meters, decorated with elegant flowers, winsome shrubs, and cascading fountains. He spared no expenses, transforming this area into a calm, serene location. His home could be found at the furthest reaches of town, somewhere secluded, yet still easily accessible to those in need. A full moon glinted from above, bathing the world in silver light. The center pond was especially beautiful, reflecting the celestial body that stretched across the sky. A dozen koi swam about. They circled the clear waters, aesthetically colored. Then they drew near, noticing her presence. They were hungry, it seemed. So, she reached into her bag of feed, then gently tossed handfuls their way. Susumaru watched with starry eyes as the fish began to eat, blissfully unaware of the world outside their tiny home. As long as they were well fed, nothing else mattered. She moved on to another section of the garden. Wielding a pair of shears, she shaped the shrubs to the best of her ability. She focused intently, squinting as her arms glided across sections of overgrown leaves. She sliced and cut, moved back to inspect, then sliced and cut some more. She continued this for some time, all too aware of Naruto's watchful gaze. The blonde doctor was a distance away, seated on a wooden bench. As a demon, her eyesight was superb, and she could see him clearly. Naruto had a sketch pad, with a brush and ink. Upon a sheet of paper, he crafted intricate symbols that seemed like a different language. Though cheerful most of the time, he still looked sad. At certain moments, she would see him looking off into the distance, regret in his sea blue gaze. For someone that helped so many, it seemed as though nothing could dull the pain in his fragile heart. Naruto noticed her staring, and she quickly got back to work. For some reason, Susumaru loved this. Long ago, she used to help her mother in their garden. She had forgotten those times, only recently remembering. She had been the youngest of three, an annoying, brash, and adventurous child that never listened to her parents. She hadn't been poor, nor had she been rich. They had a roof of their heads and food to eat. In that time, their country had begun opening its borders to the Western world, ending a 2-century-long isolationist policy. After that, advancements quickly spread to Japan, and she'd been too caught up in all the wonder to listen to her parents. She'd been rebellious, a careless child that wanted to leave the old ways behind. She began going against the wishes of her family, going to places she wasn't supposed to go. And one night, against the wishes of her father, she left despite their warnings, and it cost Susumaru her humanity, and the lives of those dearest to her. She clenched her fists. "I'll atone for it all," Susumaru promised. "And maybe someday, I might see you again, Mom, Dad. If only for a moment. To say, I'm sorry." Vigor renewed, she continued her work in the garden. It had to be perfect. Naruto had given her a second chance, an opportunity to do some good. Making sure this place was well kept was the least she could do for him. So she worked and worked until every area of the garden was touched on. Susumaru looked to him once more. Still lounging on a bench, a black cat sat on his lap, purring with delight as Naruto gently stroked its fur. She smirked, an idea coming to mind. Behind her back, she conjured a tamari ball. She gripped it tightly, locking eyes with him. Then she threw it, much faster than normal, but not enough to injure. Naruto didn't blink. He causally lifted his hand and caught her ball without an inkling of effort. He then rose from the bench, his cat protesting the sudden movement. He beamed the ball back at her, this time much faster. Her tamari tore through the air like a meteor, whistling in the night. Without a thought, she braced herself and caught it, surprised by the amount of power behind his throw. She was pushed back several meters, feet skidding against the grass. She returned it back to him, doubling her speed. He still caught it with his bare hands, a competitive gleam in his eyes. Excitement fluttered in her stomach as she took a stance, readying herself for a superhuman game of catch. They began slowly, but things soon escalated, so much so, that her Tamari was only a blur. Each time she threw it, he would catch it, sometimes jumping dozens of meters into the sky, and launching it back just as quickly. This continued for a time, until she found herself giggling with delight, returning every toss that came her way. It reminded her so much of playing with her older sister. Something welled up within her, emotions she hadn't felt in decades, and she could not contain the innocent, childlike smile that stretched across her features. Eventually, their game came to an end. Naruto resumed his work, painting those symbols again. By now, the ground was littered with numerous pages of a strange, elegant language she could not discern. Naruto then called to her. She approached, sitting down beside the blonde doctor. Immediately, his cat moved to her side, snuggling against her orange kimono, which he had bought for her, replacing her old one. Huh. Kimiko likes you. He looked genuinely surprised. She normally runs away from anyone that isn't me or Yuichiro. Well, I've always loved animals. Susumaru reached out to stroke Kimiko's black fur. At least, I've just remembered that I do. Naruto tilted his head. Your memories are still coming back. Yeah. Susumaru nodded, looking to the sky. It's kind of strange to see how much I've changed since becoming a demon. I mean, I'm still the same person somehow. But I'd forgotten so much about myself that I might as well be someone else. If you ask me, he said, that doesn't matter. It's who you are going forward that matters. She remained silent, considering his words. In a way, he was right. But it was still hard not to think of all the terrible things she did over the past 30 years. Hey, Susumaru began. She fidgeted, clasping her hands in front of her kimono. Thanks for that. For what? For throwing this with me, she answered, summoning her to marry. You promised, and you kept that promise. I know it seems dumb, but it really means a lot to me. Naruto waved her off. Don't worry about it. I needed to get up after sitting for so long, anyway. Susumaru glanced at the pages of calligraphy he had been creating. They almost looked like talismans, something a few demons were capable of producing. A type of blood demon art, they allowed demons to perform unique feats, simply by writing symbols on pieces of paper. She wanted to ask, but refrained from doing so, turning to the clinic. Yuichiro had just opened the door. He held a bag and a box of medical supplies. His hair was much shorter now, and the turquoise tint that defined his obsidian curls were much more pronounced. Despite his missing arm, he moved with confidence, approaching both of them. I'm heading out, the teen said. I changed both of the kids' bandages before they went to bed, and I restocked all the supplies. Thanks, Yui. Naruto reached out to touzle the shorter teen's hair. What would I ever do without you? Yuichiro protested, glaring as Naruto finally removed his hand. You'd be perfectly fine without me. You're just too lazy to do all the work on your own. Naruto gave a sheepish smile, crossing his arms. You know, I wouldn't mind if you stayed over for a few more days. I know you wouldn't, he answered. But I'll be fine. There haven't been any more attacks since that day. Plus, I'll be in a well-lit, crowded street. Fine, Naruto said, conceding. See you tomorrow, then. Yuichiro smiled a bit, a rare sight to behold. Later, sensei. Before leaving, he briefly looked at Susumaru, barely acknowledging her presence as he began walking through the garden and toward the exit. I get the feeling that he doesn't like me, she remarked bluntly, stating the obvious. Naruto continued writing. Don't worry about him. It takes a while for him to warm up to people. You'll see. He's very kind once you get to know him. A demon did that to his arm, she ventured. Naruto did not deny this fact, nodding. Then I don't blame him for feeling uncomfortable around me. You're sure he'll be safe going out tonight? I wouldn't be too worried. He grinned. I have a clone following him right now, just in case. A clone? She looked confused, wondering what he was talking about. Anyway, I have a question, Naruto said, changing the subject. She turned to him, curious. Do you know who was responsible for attacking all those people? Susumaru stiffened. The aura of the crime scene returned to her, filling her mind with dread. She didn't know exactly who it was, but it had smelled heavily of Musen's blood. I don't know specifically, she said quietly. But I think it was a member of the 12 Kizuki. Yes, she knew. She knew that she wasn't a member of the 12. The realization struck a few days ago, after hours of deliberation. As her memories returned, she remembered the demon that turned her. Not Musen, as she'd once believed, but someone else. She recalled the number that had been etched into his eye, a distinct number 2. An upper moon, to be exact. She had not seen him since that day, and the more she thought about it, the more it sense made. The numbers corresponded with their rank. And after looking in the mirror and finding no such number, the truth became clear. What a fool she was. For years, she had been at his beck and call, actually believing she was important to Musen. But he'd just been using her. She'd just been a tool to him. 12 Kizuki. Naruto was certain he had heard that name. Tamayo must have mentioned them before. They're important, aren't they? Very, Susumaru answered. They're the 12 most powerful demons. They serve directly under him. She did not mention Musen's name, and Naruto understood why. The curse. Another thing Tamayo had explained to him. Naruto had never encountered that man, nor did he desire to. He had other matters to attend to, more important things at hand. Besides, the Demon Slayer Corps was already on the job. This was their fight, not his. He wasn't allied with them in any way, and he had only met a handful of them. But based on the few he'd interacted with, they seemed to be highly capable warriors. The image of a water-themed slayer flashed before his eyes. Naruto shook the thought from his mind. He had other responsibilities. He had to return home. He had to save his world from the tyranny of his best friend. While he was deep in thought, Susumaru glanced at him once more, eyes roaming his features, straying far lower than they should have. Naruto was wearing a loose-fitting shirt. Unbuttoned at the collar, it exposed his neck and some of his muscled chest. Even beneath such comfortable clothes, his defined body was difficult to ignore. And the scent of his blood was even harder to resist. It had been some time since she first consumed his blood, since her moment of weakness upon entering his clinic that day. But the more time she spent with him, the more her desire for other humans waned. He seemed to notice, because he turned her. You've gone a while without blood, haven't you? Naruto said casually. Here. He leaned closer, rolling up his sleeve. She hesitated, a quiver running through her. As much as she liked to believe she had changed, she was still a demon, still beholden to certain biological instincts. Are you sure? It's been 2 days, and you haven't done anything to make me believe you were lying when you agreed to my conditions. He smiled gently. Go on. I don't mind. Oh, okay. Susumaru scooted closer, the cat at her side scurrying away. Her fangs lengthened, his scent filling her senses. He lifted his forearm to her, and she sank her teeth into his flesh. A tremor racked her body, her very being. His temperate blood filled her mouth, rushing like an endless river. She drank slowly and with a purpose, face flushing, eyes closing. She savored his taste, savored the pleasant feeling that came with this act, the warmth that spread to every portion of her body. It lasted only a few moments, but to her, it felt like an eternity. His blood wasn't like Muzin's. It wasn't harsh, nor did it force its will upon her. It almost felt kind. Finally, she pulled away. Like that day, there was no disgust in his eyes. No judgment at all. Even then, she could see the wound she'd given him begin to heal. Not as fast as a demon, but still impressive, nonetheless. Nerima, Tokyo. Ozaki yawned, stretching her arms to the night sky. Her crow squawked incessantly upon her shoulder, and she reached down to scratch its adorable little head. Though the moon glinted from above, the lamps in the city streets seemed even brighter. Being from the countryside, the city always amazed her. The buildings were taller, made of concrete and brick. The people were also different, walking about with both traditional and modern attire. She looked around with wide eyes, taking in everything she could. It wasn't often that she was called upon for missions in Tokyo. Most of her assignments involved incidents outside metropolitan areas. So, whenever she found herself here, she took the time to experience as much as she could before returning to headquarters. "Does your crow ever shut up?" Murata asked, rubbing his temples. The taller demon slayer walked beside her. Along with their standard uniform, he wore a black haori, his Nichiren blade hidden away. Ozaki's mood fell, once again reminded that he was with her. She had been so lost in the scenery that she forgot they were both assigned to this mission. She didn't hate Murata, not really. He seemed like a decent guy, as well as a fine demon slayer. But she preferred working on cases alone. They barely knew each other, too. Outside of formal meetings with the higher UPS, she hardly ever spoke to him. "He's just excited to see me, that's all," Ozaki explained. She brushed strands of onyx hair from her face, frowning. Ever since childhood, her hair had always been a bother. No matter what she did, it always looked messy, with stray locks sticking out in random places. "All right, Sara. You can go now. We got the message." As if understanding her words, the crow took off into the sky, squawking loudly. Ozaki stifled a laugh, reminded of how much she loved that little bird. Her crow had arrived to inform them of an upcoming gathering of demon slayers ranked Kinu and above. "What's the plan now?" Murata asked. After investigating for hours, they decided to take a break. They stopped by one of the food stands still open and ordered 2 bowls of ramen. Slurping the delicious noodles, Ozaki paused to think. "Before deciding on anything, let's review what we know." She placed her bowl on the table. "First, we know that for the past year, demon attacks in Nerima have been disproportionately low, at least, compared to other parts of Tokyo. I wonder why that is," said Murata, taking a bite. "I mean, in a crowded city like Tokyo, it's strange to think there is a place where demon activity is so far removed from other areas. Of course, most demons attack isolated villages, but nearly 0 attacks in a span of 12 months. That's completely unheard of." Ozaki nodded. "Exactly. Even more interesting is that, in just the past few days, demon activity has spiked significantly. And most of the victims were male, some of whom are still missing," Murata added, thinking. "This attack has me concerned, Ozaki. From what witnesses told me, multiple people died in one night. Normally, demons pick off 1 or 2 targets at once. But this attack involved 10 people." He closed his eyes, then sighed. "This might take longer than we thought." "In that case," Ozaki began, finishing her bowl, "since we'll be here for a while, let's get a place to stay." Murata rubbed his hair, blushing. "You mean, both of us?" She shrugged and grabbed her sword. "Why not? We'll look around for a few more hours before calling it a night." She paid for their meal, smirking. Just don't think of doing anything while I sleep, or you'll get a sword through the eye. Murata shuddered at the thought. Though cute and seemingly delicate, Ozaki was no pushover. They were the same rank, after all. Wouldn't dream of it. Picking up his things, Murata moved to her side, and they continued their investigation for a little while longer. The next day, Yuichiro made sure he arrived on time. He had stayed up much later than usual, having been invited to a little get-together with his neighbors. Admittedly, it wasn't his brightest idea to stay so long, but he still had fun. For the longest time, Naruto had encouraged him to make friends with other people his age. I won't be here forever, Yuichiro, Naruto had said. Begrudgingly, he accepted the suggestion, and slowly but surely, he started coming out of his shell. During his first year with Naruto, Yuichiro had been glued to him, following him around, ever willing to repay him for saving his life. But Naruto desired nothing in return. The thought of such kindness always made him feel guilty. Naruto was the older brother he never had. Before Yuichiro met him, it had been just him and his younger twin. Both of their parents had died before they turned 11, leaving them to fend for themselves. Yuichiro frowned. He had been so cruel to Muichiro, the opposite of what Naruto was to him. And of all the regrets he had in this world, it was the possibility of never getting to see his brother again, of never apologizing for being so cold and heartless, that left him in a state of sadness. He began the day by opening the curtains, allowing golden rays of light to fill the clinic. He then went to check Naruto's 3 patients. They had been here for over 2 days, steadily recovering from their injuries. Entering the room, he was greeted by the sight of Jiro, watching over his children. The man no longer had a bandage on his head, and his concussion was a thing of the past, courtesy of Naruto's healing abilities. His children were also awake, chatting with their father. They were still wrapped in bandages, but the speed at which they had recovered was astonishing. Once at death's door, both of them almost seemed ready to be discharged. Jiro smiled once he approached. "Ah, Yuichiro. Good morning." "Good morning, Jiro. I trust your night was fine." "Yes," he replied, glancing at his children. "They slept well, without a care in the world." "I'm glad," Yuichiro replied. One of the kids waved to him, which he kindly returned. "Based on their condition, I think they might be set to leave in a few days." Jiro nodded. "It's almost hard to believe." He smiled softly. "I don't have the words to express my gratitude. You and the doctor have done so much for me and my family. Even if I sold everything I owned, it would never be enough to repay you." "There's no need for any of that," Yuichiro assured, lips twitching upward. "We don't do this for attention, or even praise." I know," said the man. He paused, adding, "Even though my wife is gone, even though the world seems a bit darker, I'm still grateful for meeting you too." "I'm grateful for meeting you too, Jiro." It was Naruto. He entered the room with his usually smile, a stethoscope around his neck. The kids grew excited once they saw him, despite the tired look in his eyes. "After all," he continued, "your cooking is way better than mine. I really enjoyed the meal you made the other day. It's the least I could do." Jiro laughed a bit. "And hey, I still want you to come to my restaurant someday. I'll make you the largest bowl of ramen in the world for free." Naruto chuckled. "I'd like that, Jiro," he said, greeting each child with a fist bump. "Hey, Keiko. Hey, Kuro. You guys seem lively today. Anything exciting happen?" "Uh-huh." Kuro, the younger brother, beamed. "Me and my sister just decided." Naruto arched a brow. "Decided what?" "We decided that we want to be doctors when we grow up," Keiko explained, eyes bright. "Just like you." "Really?" he asked, playfully unconvinced. "Are you sure?" It's going to be a lot of hard work, you know.
Yeah, we know, Keiko assured.
But we want to help people, like you and Yuichiro do. Naruto glanced at his student, who looked on with amusement.
Well, then, he said.
I won't stop you too. In fact, I'm rooting for you. See, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but somehow, I still managed to learn. I'm sure both of you will be fine doctors. He ruffled each child's hair, then proceeded with his assessment. He checked their lungs and heart with his stethoscope. He then moved on to assess their skin and injuries, discreetly healing whatever wounds remained with a pulse of chakra. They were practically ready to be discharged, but he wanted Keiko to stay a bit longer so she could grow more accustomed to using crutches and her prosthetic limb. Stepping back for a bit, he watched them chat with Yuichiro. Naruto crossed his arms. He looked to Jiro, looked to the two children already laughing and giggling after such a tragedy. They didn't deserve to suffer such a thing. They had lost their mother, their home, and many others had died in this event. Naruto sighed, a long, heavy sigh, as he moved to wash his hands. Normally, he didn't get involved. The demon slayers were capable of solving these types of issues. But this time, he planned to find the demon that started this whole fiasco, whether they were a member of the 12 Kizuki or not.
Brat.
What is it, Kurama? You're getting too attached.
Attached?
Attached to what? He inquired, walking down the stairs to the basement. 2 rooms were before him. In one of them, Susumaru was sleeping. In the other, his project was waiting for him. To this world, I mean. Naruto paused at a black door. He took a deep breath, clenching his fists. I'm not a puppet, you know. I can't not feel for these people. This world, just like ours, is filled with so much pain and suffering. I'm well aware, Naruto. Who do you think gives you your power of empathy? You think I cannot feel the negative emotions around us? Sorry, he replied softly. I didn't mean to snap at you. I know. But I will remind you once more, don't forget what's at stake here.
Yeah, Naruto said, frowning.
I have to get back home before he becomes too powerful to oppose. Precisely, spoke the Biju. You already do enough with the clinic. Remember, you can't save everyone. Focus on your goal. Is that supposed to encourage me, Kurama? Naruto asked with a tired smile. That's the worst pep talk I've ever had. Damn brat. Did you expect a hug, or something? Nah. Naruto placed his palm on the door. I actually prefer your bluntness. He sent a stream of chakra through the door. Instantly, a pattern of seals appeared, glowing brightly in the darkened hall. Naruto released another burst of energy, and the door finally opened, revealing a room much bigger than any other in the house. Inside, Fuinjutsu arrays decorated every corner. The room was completely empty, save for the 6 clones sitting in a circle. They each had their eyes closed, and they were shirtless. Written upon their bodies were seals, each one different, each one more complex than the ones already etched into the walls. Seals upon seals as intricate as they were numerous. This was what he had been working on for the past 3 years. Away back home, Naruto paused to inspect his work. He studied the numerous symbols on the floors, the walls, and on the very bodies of his clones. During his training trip with Jiraiya, he had devoted himself to the study of Fuinjutsu, given access to a portion of the 4th Hokage's notes. Of course, he was by no means the greatest sealing master to ever live, but with his limited knowledge and the vast amounts of chakra the Biju provided, Naruto was closer than ever to returning to the elemental nations. His clones had their arms outstretched, channeling chakra into a small rip in the space between them. This spatial tier was the beginnings of a portal, the same kind that had sent him careening into another dimension. However, it was too small for him to pass through. Barely the width of the eye of a needle, his gate, as he'd called it, was far from ready to use. Every day, he supplied incredible amounts of chakra just to keep it open. Not just him, but the Biju as well. They were all within him, feeding chakra into his clones. If they faltered even for one moment, his way home would begin to close, and hours upon hours of progress would be lost. He'd been doing this for months, constantly transferring chakra to his clones, and having them sustain this small opening. It was tiring work, to say the least, and Yuichiro seemed to be taking notice of his recent bouts of fatigue. Unfortunately, this was the most he had gotten the gate to open. Despite the sheer amount of chakra he transmitted, this tiny portal had yet to widen significantly. Naruto stifled a yawn, stroking his chin. Last night, while watching over Susumaru, he had been working on sealing arrays, hoping that a new pattern would stimulate this stagnant portal. Holding his new sealing concepts, Naruto moved closer to his clones. "You think it'll work?" he asked. "Your formula is a bit shaky, but I believe this new addition will accelerate the portal's expansion." Thankfully, he also had Kurama, who after being sealed into Mito and Kushina Uzumaki knew a thing or two about Fuinjutsu. Naruto clasped his hands together. "All right. Let's begin." He had dozens of new sealing arrays to add to the room. In essence, he was going to be here for a while. Evening. For a moment, Ozaki thought she felt something. A rush of warmth tingled down her spine, bringing with it a feeling she could not explain. It was almost like a shockwave of energy had passed through her through the entire district, in fact. Even the street lights were affected, flickering on and off, reacting to this strange surge of power. She paused, staring ahead curiously. "You okay?" asked Murata. His arms were crossed, a single brow raised. "I could have sworn I felt a..." She paused and shook her head. "No, it's nothing." Murata shrugged, proceeding onward. After spending most of their morning resting at an inn, she and Murata set out once more. Now, it was nearing sunset. They had been at this since the afternoon, asking around for information concerning the recent demon attack. Eventually, they found themselves at the scene of the incident. Even though they'd been here yesterday, the sheer destruction still shocked them. A whole city block had been affected. Large claw marks could be seen upon ruined buildings, even on the ground, etched into the dirt. No matter what you believed, there was no denying that this was an abnormal event. People living in the city were less spiritual, less superstitious, than their rural counterparts. Even then, as they combed through the streets, they heard whispers of demons uttered from the lips of, otherwise rational, urban residents. The area of the attack was silent. Fewer people walked the streets, especially as the evening came and the sun began to set. Officers were still stationed at the scene, and a few others worked to remove whatever debris was left. After asking around to no avail, they finally decided to speak to an officer. The Demon Slayer Corps was not officially recognized by the Japanese government. As a result, they did their best to steer clear of law enforcement, lest they interfere with their missions. But in this case, they were desperate for more information, and interacting with the police was their final option. "You're travelers, huh?" said the officer, baton at his side. "And you're wondering what happened here?" Making sure his sword was hidden, Murata nodded. Yeah. You see, Ozaki is a writer and she..." He glanced over to his companion, silently begging for help. "I create fictional stories based on real-world events that blur the line between reality and fantasy." The life flowed from Ozaki's lips, smooth and effortless. "If possible, could you tell me more about what happened?" The officer rubbed his balding scalp. "I couldn't tell you, honestly. I wasn't on duty that night." Both demon slayers seemed to deflate. "However, a buddy of mine was. He saw the initial scene, all the bodies, everything. He mentioned that a doctor was there as well. In fact, he's pretty famous around here."
Dr. Uzumaki. He's been treating those that were injured that night. If you want more information, he's your guy. Murata nodded, glad they had gotten something. Where can we find this doctor? The older man pointed north. A kilometer or so that way. Keep on straight. Make a right, then a left. He has a really nice garden. You can't miss it. Both of them dipped their heads. Thank you, sir, Ozaki said, before they turned to leave. No problem, the officer replied. You two be careful. With new information in mind, Murata led the way. They moved on in relative silence, even as the sun began to set. Unconsciously, their hands were on the hilts of their blades, ever ready for an attack. And though she had been a demon slayer for 3 years, her heart still pounded when night fell, bringing with it memories of a time she never wanted to remember. Hey, Murata. He glanced at her. Yeah. Why did you become a demon slayer? Murata rubbed his dark mane, a habit of his. Well, I became a demon slayer to protect people. He took a deep breath, eyes distant. My family, they were all killed. I wasn't there to save them, so I try my hardest to be there for anyone who needs help. Ozaki smiled a bit. Murata was a much better person than she was. I'm glad you didn't see them die, she whispered. I wasn't so fortunate. What happened? He asked gently. The grip around her sword tightened. My brother hid me away when a demon attacked my family. I have very good hearing, you see. And I could hear everything, the screams of my mother, my father, and my brother. I'll never forget it. Never. That's why. She said through gritted teeth. That's why I'll never stop until every demon is dead. This is my desire, my one reason for become a demon slayer. The passion in her gaze was so intense, Murata didn't know what to say. Ozaki was normally sweet and meek when not on a mission. But here, she seemed like an entirely different person. However, he did not judge her for her anger. Well, everyone has their reasons. And I don't think any reason is better or worse. As long as we defeat them, everyone's motivation is valid, he offered. Ozaki seemed to agree, but she remained silent, eyes straight ahead as they neared this Dr. Uzumaki's clinic. With night falling, Susumaru found herself in the garden once again. It was a cloudy evening, so she could come out a bit earlier than usual. Surprisingly, she had slept the whole day. She hadn't seen Naruto yet, either. Normally, he would be out, watching over her long into the night. She wondered when he even had the time to rest, considering the fact that he ran the clinic and kept her company at the same time. She sat at that same bench, reading a book he had gotten her. Kimiko was next to her, curled up in her lap, purring. Truly, she hadn't felt this at peace in ages. No worries. No needing to please Muzan. No constant complaints of being filthy from Yahuba. She could just be in the moment. For once, she could enjoy looking at the clouds above. The tranquility was broken when Yuichiro opened the door. Like before, he was done for the day. He had a bag strewn around his shoulders. And the instant he locked eyes with her, his gaze narrowed. He kept his distance, walking past her without a word. She wasn't offended. He had every right to be wary of her. But despite his behavior, Susumaru still raised her voice. "Where's Naruto?" she asked. The teen paused. He didn't turn to face her. "He's in the basement," Yuichiro stated. "Sometimes he goes there to work on certain projects." Oh. Her face fell. "He won't be coming out tonight." "Maybe. Maybe not. But trust me, he's still watching you." He pointed to various sections of the garden. "See those symbols over there?" Susumaru searched until she found what he was referring to, noticing for the first time. "I don't know how they work, but he said something about them being security seals."
Somehow, they alert him to people entering or leaving the clinic. He crossed his arms. So don't even think of escaping, because he'll know. Susumaru looked on, fascinated. The more she learned about Naruto, the less she believed he was entirely human. Some of the things he could do were comparable to a blood demon art. And one more thing, Yuichiro said. Don't get too attached to him. She froze. What are you? The closer you get to him, the harder it's going to be when he finally leaves? Yuichiro shook his head, frowning. Why am I even telling you this? He murmured, making his way out of the garden without another word. When he finally leaves? She pondered those words, silently watching the sky as the moon began to rise. Later, you're sure that's a demon? Asked Murata, skeptical. Hidden behind the walls of the clinic, Ozaki nodded. They had arrived moments ago, having followed the officer's directions. At first, their intention had been to ask permission to enter, but that all changed the instant they saw a woman sitting in the garden. I'm sure, Murata, Ozaki whispered. I told you, didn't I? My hearing is more heightened than most. So. A demon's heart rate is much slower than a human's, much slower. And there's a certain sound it makes, a soft, yet powerful sound, she explained. That's the first thing I heard when I saw her. Murata looked on with a mixture of amazement and bewilderment. But honestly, he wasn't that surprised. He'd heard that some people could smell demons, too. Okay, what's the plan? Ozaki unsheathed her blade, eyes narrowed. We kill her, of course. She heard their footsteps before the gates burst open. Shit. Susumaru ducked as a sword sailed over her head, glinting in the night. Eyes widening, she quickly grabbed Kimiko and jumped to safety, landing in front of the pond. The bench itself had been split in two, just moments after she escaped. Standing before her were two demon slayers. Just my luck. Wielding their katanas, they encircled her, eyes burning fiercely. She set Kimiko on the grass, then raised her hands up. Hey, I know this may sound strange, especially since I'm a demon, but I don't want to fight you guys. They didn't believe her, nor did they listen, because they were on the offensive once again. Ozaki sucked in a breath, filling her lungs with oxygen, life-giving oxygen that strengthened every facet of her being, granting her the power to face any threat. She and Murata moved in a burst speed. Their swords pierced through the air, aimed at the demon before them. Susumaru leapt to the side, avoiding their sudden attack. Not a moment later, Murata was upon her, whispering something about water, before spinning in her direction, an unyielding technique she could barely evade. And just when she thought she avoided it, she felt a terrible pain as her arm was cut cleanly from her body, courtesy of Murata. Blood sprayed from the stump, painting the grass crimson. Whirling around, she felt another blade sink into her stomach, this time, from Ozaki. Susumaru hissed, leaping away once more. Should I fight them? Self-preservation screamed yes, but a voice in the back of mind said no. Because she promised. Their attacks continued, growing faster and more ferocious. She felt her body being riddled with deep cuts, made worse by the force of their swings. Yet, she did not retaliate. She dodged as best she could, her mind racing a mile a minute. By now, her clothing, the very ones Naruto had given her, were torn to shreds. A sword sliced her eye, blinding her. She howled, sweeping the female slayer's feet with a kick. Momentarily distracted, the male sword came swinging toward her neck. Susumaru raised her arm to lessen the blow but lost her other limb in the process. The pain was immense, her breathing panicked. She leapt away once more, losing her footing and landing in the pond. The fish swam away as her blood drained into the water, tinting it red. Even though she was stronger than the average demon slayer, fighting two at once was no easy feat, especially when she was on the defense. Still, Perhaps she should have fought back. Perhaps she should have attacked them in return. Anger suddenly flared within, bubbling to the surface. But then, she thought of her promise to Naruto. Her promise to never harm another human, to protect them instead. Her shoulders slumped with defeat. She smiled sadly, watching her reflection in the water. Blood flowed from her wounded eye, her hair ruffled, and her clothes ruined. Her arms were nothing but stumps, and she could hardly support her body weight. As sad as she was to die, at least she tried. At least she kept her word. And she was grateful for the second chance she had been given, no matter how short it was. Both demon slayers loomed over her, their weapons raised. She saw a glint of steel as a blade descended, slicing through the air, ready to sever her head. Susumaru closed her eyes and waited for the end to come. Waited for cold steel to touch her neck. But it never did. Ozaki grunted as her weapon was met by another blade. Not a sword, but a knife. A single knife had halted her swing, halted the execution of this demon. She saw a flash of golden hair before they were blasted back by a gust of wind. She yelped, finding her balance as she and Murata skidded to a stop. The trees swayed and the grass shuddered, shaken by the sudden gale. "You all right?" asked Murata. She looked to her partner, nodding. "Yeah, but what was that?" Their gazes soon found the source of the disruption. A blond man had appeared, seemingly from thin air. He held the demon in his arms, cradling her close to his chest. "I'm sorry," the man whispered. "I should have been here sooner." The demon laughed weakly, relaxing in his arms. "Just what were you doing, anyway?" "Messing with a bunch of seals." He looked sheepish. "My new design knocked me out, almost killed me, in fact." "Stupid fox." "I thought he said it would work," he muttered, though he didn't appear to be upset. Susumaru did not understand what he was talking about, but she didn't care. She was just glad that he was here. Naruto turned to the two demon slayers, eyes flashing crimson, but only for a moment. And suddenly, a feeling of terror washed over them. There was an aura about him. It had risen for only a second, but it was enough to make their legs shake. A shiver racked Ozaki's body, a bead of sweat trailing down her temple. She glanced at Murata, who looked even paler than usual. The grip on his sword loosened, and his teeth chattered with fear. She turned her gaze back to the blond man. He was moving, carrying the demon to a spot under a beautiful tree. He placed her down gently, then turned, putting himself between her and their swords. Is this another demon, she wondered, then listened. His heart rate was slow though, not like a demon's. But that aura she had sensed, the intimidating power that radiated from him. It was the same thing she had felt earlier, the same energy that had nearly plunged the district into darkness. No. He couldn't be human. No human possessed such presence. She gritted her teeth and stilled her fear. There was no number written on his eye, so he couldn't be one of the 12. "You ready, Ozaki?" asked Murata. It seemed he had recovered as well, his sword aimed forward. She nodded. "Yeah." Ozaki slid into a solid stance. She held her blade in a sideways grip. Naruto rubbed his spiky mane, kunao in one hand. "Wait a minute, guys," he implored. "Can we at least talk about this first?" Murata scowled. "Why would we want to listen to two demons?" Naruto seemed taken aback. He paused, glancing at Susumaru, before chuckling. "You think I'm a demon?" They said nothing, moving forward. Naruto sighed. "Fine, then. Don't listen." He shifted into a stance of his own, chakra flaring. Ozaki sucked in another breath. She felt a sudden surge of energy, fueled by the very air around her. Her lungs expanded. Her arteries grew. And her muscles bulged. Light breathing, first form, Piercing luminance, she shot forward, the world around her blurring out of focus. Only her target could be seen, watching her with expectant eyes. She closed the distance between them in moments, but he was not surprised. He deflected her strike with a kunao, a painful ring filling the night sky. Murata was upon him an instant later. He swung his sword with deadly force. Naruto ducked beneath the slash, avoiding an attack that would have taken his head off. Grinning, he parried Ozaki's second thrust. And in one smooth motion, his elbow came careening into Murata's chest. A pained grunt escaped his lips, and he was thrown back. Naruto moved forward, thrusting his kunao toward Ozaki, a faint glow surrounding his weapon. Second form, reflection. She deflected his blade with enough force to release sparks. He almost seemed impressed. And she advanced once more, engaging him in close combat. With all the years of training at her fingertips, she began with a targeted series of slashes, each one aimed to tear muscle, split bone, and sever limbs. But like earlier, he dodged every attack that came his way. He leaned slightly with every swing, avoiding her blade by a hair. He was nimble, free almost like air itself, shifting to escape any obstacle. Third form, flowing dance. That was Murata. He was back, joining the fray. His movements mimicked the fluid nature of water, careening, and flowing like the tides. Fourth form, luminous dance. Ozaki switched her technique to something akin to Murata's. And together, they continued the offensive, slashing and slicing with a ferocity few possessed. But despite their best efforts, their opponent was unfazed, ducking and weaving past every movement of their blades. Then, he finally began using his weapon. His hand was a blur as he deflected each and every one of their attacks. The force behind that kunao was immense, inhuman. Ozaki could feel the vibrations running up her arms, rattling the very bones in her body. With a single attack, he knocked both swords from their hands. Murata didn't have time to react as a kick sent him flying into a nearby tree. He didn't get up. Ozaki's eyes widened. She felt a blow to the face, and then a fist plowed into her stomach. Her vision blurred as darkness threatened to overtake her. She fell to her knees, sword landing beside her. Then the fear came, and with it, the sudden realization that she would soon die. She trembled. The battle had been over so quickly. In fact, it seemed as though he could have killed them in an instant if wanted to. He'd only been toying with them, humoring them until he grew bored. Tears stung at her eyes, and she hated the fact that she was starting to cry. But she couldn't stop the tears, nor could she halt the memories of that day, that terrible day when demons had slaughtered her family. Terror and rage filled her being, the same feeling she felt when her brother had hidden her away. The blonde approached her, twirling his kunao. "Will you listen now?" he inquired. Ozaki gritted her teeth. Her brows furrowed. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I will never reason with a demon." She reached for her sword. Naruto blurred and appeared next to her. He landed a single chop to the neck, and her world went black. The girl slumped in the grass, unconscious. Naruto let loose a breath, glancing at her partner. He was out cold as well. He had made sure not to hit them too hard, but still, he had to make sure they were all right. He retrieved both of their swords, observing them with curious eyes. Nichiren blades. The primary weapon of the Demon Slayer Corps, capable of killing demons. He tested one, swinging it. Naruto shrugged, then placed them on the grass. Not really my style. Plus, something felt odd about those blades. Something familiar. Susumaru was walking toward him by now, arms wrapped around herself. All her injuries were gone, and no matter how many times he saw it, he was always amazed by a demon's ability to recover from practically any injury. Well, that was quite a mess. Next him, she nodded. They didn't even want to talk. And they thought I was a demon, too. She smirked. Well, I didn't think you were human either the first time we met. Susumaru's eyes fell on the tear-stained cheeks of Ozaki. But I don't think I blame them for feeling this way about demons about me. Naruto regarded her with a gentle gaze. They attacked you first, didn't they? She nodded slowly, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. They weren't injured by time I arrived, but you were. You didn't hurt them, even as they attacked, aiming to kill. He looked genuinely happy. You kept your promise. She smiled a bit, crossing her arms. Of course I did. I should have been out here with you, he remarked. Don't worry about that. I'm fine now. Susumaru glanced at her tattered attire. I'm sorry about ruining the clothes you got for me. It's all right. Naruto was far from angry about that. There was a more pressing issue at hand. What to do with these two demon slayers? Or in this case, his two new patients. Naruto scooped up the female, then did the same for the male. Hoisting both of them over his shoulders, he made his way to the clinic, Susumaru following closely behind. Naruto could feel his strength returning, steadily. His new sealing array had knocked him unconscious, draining too much chakra too quickly, then releasing a pulse of energy so great that it covered the entire district. It appeared the female demon slayer might have sensed it, judging by the way she'd looked at him. He would have to be careful next time. And of course, most importantly, he would never listen to Kurama again. Shut up, brat. I'm only kidding, you damn furball. Later, location unknown, please, stop. Myokugo's mouth watered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. The boy in her grasp squirmed beneath her hold, but he could not escape. Though she was smaller than him, he was powerless before her. Compared to the strength of a demon, he might as well have been an ant. She pulled him closer, savoring the aroma that flowed from his body. He was young, supple, just the way she liked them. Barely a teenager by the looks of things, the boy's features were pristine, unmarred by time and the hardships of life. His Mareka blood filled her nostrils, making her quake with hunger. By now, the boy was crying. Why are you doing this? I'm sorry, she wailed. Even then, a wicked grin was plastered across her face, despite the tears that rolled down her cheeks. I just can't help myself. With a feral growl, her fangs and claws lengthened. She sank her teeth into his throat, his screams of horror filling the night sky. His blood flooded her mouth, and not a single drop was spilled. Then she devoured him utterly and completely, shivering with momentary satisfaction. Not enough, she mused, the thrill of the kill subsiding. It was never enough. Then, from the shadows, a single figure emerged. He possessed long, flowing black hair and a beard. Upon his left eye was a single number 2. He walked with his arms crossed, a smirk on his lips. Must you always play with them beforehand? Rokuro asked, stopping in front of the crouched demon. Myokugo looked away, eyes finding the ground. I guess not, she whispered. But where's the fun in that? Lower rank 2 chuckled. Well, to each their own, I suppose. He surveyed the area, observing the bodies that surrounded them. All males. No older than 20 years of age, it seemed. How long has it been since we last saw each other, Myokugo? Finally standing up, she twiddled her thumbs nervously. About 10 years, I think. And you've been well? Why yes, replied the demon. Rokuro leaned against a tree, a lengthy silence descending. Still the same Myokugo, I see. Sometimes he wondered how she was rank 4, judging by her strange mannerisms. But looking around, he was reminded why. As timid as she seemed, she was far more gruesome and bloodthirsty than even him. Weary waiting for one more, she supplied. Oh. Rokuro glanced her way. You didn't invite just me? How interesting. Just what do you need us for, exactly? Myokago's gaze found the ground, but her bloodlust was almost palpable. She shivered with remembrance as the image of a blond man flashed before her eyes. He was the one human she just had to devour. I need you to help me capture a certain human. A human, you say? Rokuro echoed. A demon slayer. And no. Not one of them. But someone better. As someone who possesses blood so irresistible, all those with Mareka pale in comparison. Rokuro crossed his arms once more, a grin stretching across his features. Now, I'm curious. But couldn't you just capture this one human on your own? He's strong. I'd say almost as powerful as a Hashira. A Hashira? His eyes widened. And yet, he is not a demon slayer. And not that I'm aware of, Myokago said. I've watched him from afar. He doesn't seek out demons to kill, not like they do. But our kind are always drawn to him. And every single time he is attacked, he comes out unscathed. Rokuro stroked his beard. This is intriguing. Most intriguing. Okay, Myokago. Say I help you capture him. What do I get in return? A piece of him, Myokago promised. You may have any part you like. Trust me. It will be worth it. I believe devouring him will provide us with enough power to rival the upper moons. A bellowing laugh escaped Rokuro's lips, echoing through the forest. All right, number 4. I'll humor you. Myokago nodded, an anticipatory glint in her eyes. And finally, the last person appeared. He emerged from the bushes, arms clasped behind his back. Lower rank 6. End.